What's going on, everybody? This is the Factory Tour. As you know, I am Paul Patterson, your host, and today I'm joined by my friend Ben Winkler. You've seen him before. This is his third appearance on the show. We almost didn't even have to get to do this show today because first Ben had technical difficulties, then I had technical difficulties. You can see I'm not wearing my AirPods as per usual. They did not want to pair to my computer, so I'm back to the big bulky headphones. Ben is using his mother's laptop, but we persevere. We bring you the content that you desire, no matter the cost, no matter what it takes. So, Ben, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good, other than the aforementioned technical difficulties that we've encountered. But I'm definitely ready to talk about some Dynasty, and yeah, no, feel good.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's going to stop us from talking about football. We are total degenerates. It is full on degenerate gambling season for those of you that like to bet on preseason fantasy football or anything like that. I don't even go that deep, but I know some of you sickos do. So we will talk a little bit about preseason today. We're going to talk about just some of the general storylines, beat reports, camp battles, what matters, what doesn't, all that good stuff. Before we do, we are going to jump into the mailbag today because we got some good questions, all from friends of the show, actually, former guests. So they chipped in with some good questions, some hard to answer questions, if I'm being honest. We're going to start out with one from Malcolm, who was on the show a couple weeks ago to talk about his startup strategy guide. He asked a very interesting question where I'm still working my way through the answer, but Malcolm asked us to rank these five quarterbacks according to their August 2026 startup ADP. So we're looking way out into the future. We're getting out the crystal ball. How will these five be ranked? Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, and Caleb Williams. Ben, what do you think here off the top?
Like you said, this is a really, really intriguing question to kind of think about, and I think that kind of flies under the radar here is how old the other guys are going to be, especially when we look at Lamar Jackson. We're talking about their average draft position here, not where me and you personally would rank them. I know that
Right.
you're a huge Lamar Jackson fan, and I am as well, but I think that it's pretty easily going to be him in last of these five, just or of these five, just because of the way that people are going to react to him aging as a rushing quarterback. And while I'd never like to put him in the box of just being a rushing quarterback, the fact of the matter is he does gain a lot of his dynasty value based on his rushing ability. And that is going to be something that people point to as a concern. Personally, I am always someone who likes to shoot young. People know that with my very high Anthony Richardson ranking and such and such. So with Caleb Williams being 24 3 years from now versus all of these guys entering their 29, 30, 31 seasons, I kind of have a hard time putting Caleb anywhere other than first. But that's just me personally. I think that while there is some inherent risk with Caleb being an incoming rookie, he's just kind of a special case, at least from what I've seen from him. So
Yeah, that's all fair. I definitely see that. I have Lamar last as well for basically the same reasons that you said. Like the odds that over the next 3 years, there's either like an injury or some kind of narrative that he's gonna decline and not be able to rush with age, or maybe he has a down season at some point as a passer. I don't know. Any of those things. I feel like his value is the most fragile of these guys because he's not viewed the same way as Herbert, Burrow, and Allen as passers. So whether it's right or wrong, I think he will probably be last. For what it's worth, at this time, Josh Allen will be 30 years old. Lamar will be 29, Burrow will be 29, and Herbert will be 28. And as you said, Caleb will be 24. Now, I have a lot of trouble putting Caleb at the top. I think Caleb Williams realistically will either be first or last of this group, right? Like he probably won't be in the middle because if he is what we think he's going to be, then he's going to be first by virtue of the age, like you said. If he's not what we think, then it doesn't matter. Like he's not going to be anywhere near the rest of these guys if he just flames out. So I think putting him first makes sense. If he's not first, he's probably last. I'm not sure what kind of needle he would have to thread to be like between Burrow and Herbert or something on the list. Like that would be strange because I don't think any of these other guys are really going to distance themselves too much from each other.
whenever I'm ranking players, I kind of find myself, and as a ranker for DFF, I kind of find myself ranking them in clumps of similar players. So, like you said, I don't really know how Caleb would slide himself in between Burrow and Herbert, especially who I think are going to be really similar dynasty assets as they start to age out. They're just going to be a couple of guys who don't really run and just score a ridiculous amount of touchdowns, and that's how they give you that elite production that we've been seeing from them. So I don't really know how he could, like you said, thread the needle and split the difference there.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that makes the most sense. And I'm a little more conservative. So like if I'm playing now, like if we think of what's actionable here, even if we think Caleb's the most likely to be first out of this group, I'm still like heavily valuing those other guys ahead of him in Dynasty. We don't want to think too far ahead when we're making decisions and say, well, hey, Caleb's going to be first out of these guys 3 years from now. So I might as well pivot to him now because I know I have the safe asset. It's like number one, there isn't a guarantee that he's going to hit on that level, even if we think he's a star studded prospect. Can't miss. We obviously saw Trevor Lawrence get off to a slow start in his career. Andrew Luck was that guy, and he dealt with injuries and then retired. So like, there's no sure things. Um, so I would still need like a heavy plus on top to move any of these guys for Caleb straight up at the moment.
In
And
3 years,
also,
yeah, 3 years of elite quarterback protection is just not something to scoff at either, and that's something that we can't even put a price tag relative to this ranking here. Is that obviously we're taking any of these guys over Caleb straight up right now.
right. And yeah, exactly. You're going to get that scoring over the next couple of years because you have this season, obviously, and then next season, Caleb's going to be a rookie. He's pretty unlikely to be some league winning quarterback as a rookie. That basically does not happen. Low end QB1 is kind of your ceiling outcome there. So you're talking, would it be 2026 at that point or the 2025? See, next year's 2024 rookie year. Yeah. So
Mhm.
entering the 2025 season, now he could be in that conversation as a top 5 fantasy quarterback in seasonal drafts. Definitely that gap, that waiting for the production is enough to keep him lagging behind the group for now. So that is an interesting question. It is always fun to think ahead, try to make predictions about what's going to happen. It does sort of help you rationalize your positions for players in the immediate future as well. Our second question comes in from Matt Ward, who appeared on the very second episode, I think, of the show, way, way, way back in April. I actually convinced him to jump on with me next week, so you'll be hearing from Matt again soon. He is very sharp, knows his stuff, and he asks us a difficult question again. How do you rank win now assets in conjunction with younger, equally valued assets? Linear rankings have always misconceptualized the fact that value does not equal production, in my opinion. So, how do we navigate those waters? So, the first thing I'm thinking here, in navigating these win now assets versus younger assets, is kind of the obvious low hanging fruit here, which is that your team build is going to be the biggest tiebreaker in these situations. Like if you have a certain amount of value that you're looking to allocate to a position and you're rebuilding, you're obviously going to target the younger ascending asset or the draft pick as opposed to the older productive asset that's ready to decline. Is there something maybe a little less obvious that comes to mind for you, Ben, in terms of this question?
Not really. I think that to a degree, there's a little bit of upside chasing that you can do with the younger, equally valued asset, but usually that's also situation dependent. A guy like Quentin Johnston would be a good example of that to me, where his ceiling is just so high that maybe you look at some similarly valued assets like maybe a Jerry Judy or a DJ Moore who go around the same range as him, and you say, okay, maybe Quentin Johnston has a higher ceiling and he has more time to reach it because he's a younger asset. But usually, like you said, it kind of is really team build dependent, and you
Mhm.
can't really get around that.
Um, I don't think your team build should dictate 100% of these decisions. Like, if you are a win now team, that doesn't mean every decision that you make should be win now, because that's how you end up with a very top heavy roster that ends up into like a multi year rebuild once it's all over. You want to kind of diversify your assets even within the same roster. And you don't want to pile up too many similar bets. Like you don't want to have Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, and Cooper Cup on the same dynasty team. It's just you can only increase your odds of winning so much, and you add so much fragility to the value of your roster when you hold that many valuable players, that are 29, 30 years old. So I would say as you're looking to meet your team needs in terms of contending, yeah, you're going to want to break ties towards the older productive assets. Like if you have a clear weakness at wide receiver and you otherwise have a great team, you should definitely want Devontae Adams rather than Jordan Addison. But if you have a collection of these assets and you want to mitigate some risk by turning some of that production now into safer assets, you can also do that on a win now team. So it's not just your overall team build, it's also what assets you have on your team and what trade maybe helps you balance some value, play things a little safe, and extend your window out into the future.
Yeah, that's a great point. At the end of the day, we're still playing Dynasty. It's not redraft. So if you have a team that's win now, you can feel free to pile on scoring assets that are going to add points to your roster in 2023. But you can't forget about the future of your team. You can't forget about maybe adding draft picks here and there. I've heard you talk all the time about how you don't like to just leave your contending teams without first in the next year or so.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be shipping off, your 25 first to get any extra firepower that you can. You don't that's like a kind of a last ditch effort sort of thing. That's not like let's just empty the bank account on everything that we could possibly want. It's
Yeah.
just it's not good thinking to do that. Totally lost my train of thought. I was going to add another point. Oh, on the flip side, that's what I was going to say. On the flip side, if you're rebuilding, it doesn't really work the same way. There's not a lot of situations when you're rebuilding where you're going to want to take on those older heavy risk assets. Really, it's only if you're going to get like maybe you get a massive value win because somebody wants to sell low and then you think you can flip that asset in season for a profit, but that can get risky. You need an active league for that. And also, if the person's trading low to you, unless they just didn't do their due diligence, there just probably isn't that much interest from the rest of the league. So, by and large, if you have a low value or like a rebuilding, tanking team, you're always going to break the ties towards those younger, safer assets, especially draft picks.
And if you were rebuilding, there was a time to buy veterans, and it was 3 months ago when they were dirt
Mhm.
cheap, and you could buy Keenan Allen for like an early third because everyone was screaming about all the rookies that they wanted to draft. Now your window is kind of closing as we get closer to the start of the year. People are starting to value the points on their roster, and they're not looking at age as much. So you kind of missed your window there, and now's the time to get ready to hold your veterans if you have them.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, you might be a rebuilding team because you missed that window to buy veterans. If you were more open to contending or you were, trying to keep your team open to all possibilities and you were buying up those veterans just because they were cheap, you might be looking at a contending roster now, but it's kind of too late to try to put that all together just a few weeks before the season starts. Um, Closing things out with our last question coming from Chris Miles, a guest you guys all should know well at this point. He asks, "What are we thinking about Justin Ross?" He says, "Looking healthy, playing with the ones, very bad wide receiver room in Kansas City. Could be an interesting asset." I have a pretty clear answer to this, Ben, but I'd love to hear your thoughts first.
I mean, it feels like a trap, and everything about it is screaming, "Don't do it." But he was really good in college, and he was like a first round kind of tier prospect at Clemson before all of that crazy medical stuff happened. And at the end of the day, the NFL loves a good storyline. And, you know, I'm here for it. If it happens, it happens. I'm not expecting it to happen, but I have a couple shares. They didn't cost me anything. It was a
Right.
waiver pickup or like a 30th round startup pick. So I don't really have any like deep investment in Justin Ross, but it would be really dope to see him pan out like this. And it would be something pretty unprecedented from my knowledge of football. So
Yeah. Dope but unprecedented. The Justin Ross story. That's going to
there
be
you
the
go.
30 for 30 title. No, I mean, I'm rooting for the guy, obviously. Like, we always want to see players return from injuries and succeed, but the injury that he has dealt with is one we really haven't seen anybody overcome. I definitely think that the Justin Ross hype is a little overblown. I don't even really think the highlight plays that I've seen are actually that impressive. I mean, it's camp, so like none of it's very
Yeah.
impressive, but it's really not. I don't think he's really running with the ones all that much. Like there were times that Kadarius Toney was out, various other wide receivers were out from Kansas City, and so maybe he played some snaps with the ones, but he's really not in that mix. The Chiefs are probably going to keep six wide receivers. That's usually the most that any team carries at any given time. We know that Sky Moore, Rasheed Rice, Marquez Valdez-Scantling are locked in. Kadarius Toney is locked in. Whether or not he starts the year on is like as injured and they carry an extra guy remains to be seen. They expect him to play week one, so that's four. Justin Watson is probably a lock because he is kind of the direct backup to MVS's field stretching role, and he's also a special teams contributor. And then you have Richie James, who, by all accounts, is also having a great camp, seems to be getting more run with the ones than Justin Ross, also a special teams contributor, very good punt returner. So for me, my money's on those six making the team and Ross being the one left out in the cold. If you have him on your dynasty team and you picked him off waivers, by all means, hold on to him and see what happens. But I would not be trading anything of material value to get Justin Ross on your team, just for the vibes.
My real answer to the Chiefs wide receiver room is no thanks, I'm good, because it's just a hot mess and it never ends up really doing anything for us in fantasy. We've fallen for that so many years. The real answer to Kansas City Chief pass catchers is Travis Kelce and nobody else. So
I might have something to say to that, but we can circle back around to it later on in the show. We are going to move here to the news, though, the beat reports, the holdouts, the false flags that are shifting ADPs both in seasonal and dynasty drafts. Starting off with these running backs, because there have been a ton of running back storylines over the past few weeks. We have Josh Jacobs holding out. We have J.K. Dobbins with a phantom mystery injury. We have Jonathan Taylor requesting a trade. Alvin Kamara gets a suspension. Dalvin Cook can't trick anyone into overpaying him. These are all the stories that we're seeing. So I'd love to just go through these 5 running backs real quick and kind of figure out, are there any action points here, something we should be doing with these players? Have our opinions changed? And we'll just start at the top with Josh Jacobs. Basically, he wants a contract. The Raiders offered him some money. He didn't want that much money. He wanted more. He doesn't want to play on the franchise tag, I guess. And so he's not showing up for anything at this point. You're the Raiders fan, Ben. How do you see this playing out?
I think that the Raiders really, really want to be good this year, and they're really, really not going to be good this year. And I think that they're going to realize that really soon. And a big reason why we were able to stay afloat last year was how good Josh Jacobs was. And I am a big proponent of running backs don't matter. My first demo article for DFF was about how running back by committee is going to take over the league and how teams are already switching to that, and how I don't think that there's ever going to be another workhorse again. But Josh Jacobs did that last year. He was really, really good. He was the fantasy RB3. He was the NFL's rushing leader. And when you turn on the tape, and he was just incredible. The way he was able to make defenders miss in a phone booth, the power that he ran with, the aggression that he ran with. If you watch the Kansas City game from last year, the game that we played on the road against them, he had multiple runs there where he literally looked like he was trying to kill the defenders in front of him. And that kind of aggression is what separates, in my opinion, the really elite rushers from the not really elite rushers. And there are guys like Christian McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs, I think, will be one of those guys who they don't need to be elite aggressive rushers to be fantasy producers. But when we're talking about NFL running backs, I think that kind of running style is really valued by the teams. The thing is, the shelf life isn't very long. I love Josh Jacobs. He's one of my favorite players. He's been one of my favorite players the entire time I've been a Raiders fan. The fact of the matter is, though, that he is about to turn, I believe, 26 in this coming December. And when you run like that, and he's struggled with injuries in the past, you're not going to last very long. And if he gets a second contract and he's inked for 4 or 5 years, by the time we get to the end of that contract, we're going to be talking about it like the same way that Cowboys fans were talking about the Ezekiel Elliott contract this past year, which was we shot ourselves in the foot and we can't invest elsewhere with that money. So I think that the odds of the Raiders budging are a lot lower than the odds of Jacobs budging, because I think that the downside for the Raiders is we'll get a higher draft pick and we'll get an answer at quarterback. And the downside for Josh Jacobs is his career could go down the drain. And that really sucks, but it's just kind of the way I see it.
Yeah. I agree with your read on the thing. I mean, we can argue all day and night about, the CBA and how running backs are treated and how we can fix that problem. Like, I'm all for it. I mean, it sucks for them, obviously, but just in terms of a dynasty outlook, he doesn't have any leverage to hold out. We've seen this story before. Tons of players hold out. Like most years there are players that hold out, and almost every time they come back and they play week 1. And when it doesn't happen, like with Le'Veon Bell, it usually goes pretty poorly for the player that holds out. So I would say that Jacobs is going to play. I haven't really changed anything about how I'm viewing Josh Jacobs for the upcoming season. If anything, I'm buying. I've been drafting him more in best ball and underdog. He's been falling into like the late 3rd round, which is just ludicrous. So I've been backing the truck up on Josh Jacobs bags, and I'm not worried about him not playing. eventually he's going to play. He's going to make a good chunk of change this year on the franchise tag. It's not like he's, getting paid peanuts. He has every reason to come back and get that money, even though he does want a long-term deal.
When he does play too, he is literally the lifeblood of the Raiders offense. It's him and Devontae Adams and pretty much no one else last year. Jacobs is getting 4 or 5 catches a game and then 20 to 25 carries a game. It's an absurd amount of volume, and he's really good with the volume. He's efficient on it, and he gets high value touches in the red zone, and he's just going to be elite if he does play. And like you said, the odds of him not playing are really low because there's really just not a ton of upside to him actually holding out. And I don't see that being the end of this saga for him.
Yeah, a point I've heard about these running backs that does make some sense to me is if there's risk anywhere, it's actually in the tail end of the season. If we see guys like Jacobs or Taylor, or any of these other disgruntled running backs pick up, little nicks and bruises throughout the year, maybe they're a little bit more hesitant to come back and play when they're not 100%. Maybe they get shut down early if they're on bad teams, which Josh Jacobs obviously is. That's really where the risk lies. And we don't know for sure if that's how it's going to go down. At that point, maybe he's, trying to lead the league in rushing, or he's, maybe he's playing for pride at that point. So we don't really know what's going to happen. But if there's risk anywhere, I think it's more there than it is in week 1.
Yeah, I would like to think too that the Le'Veon Bell ordeal lives in the heads of running backs too, and I just kind of really hope that doesn't happen again. And I'd like to think that it won't. So I'm sort of treating these running backs the same way that you said, where I'm just going to treat them as if they're playing, and if they decide not to play, then I'll get screwed over. And I'm pretty much okay with the results on that because that's just how my process is.
Yeah, I agree with you there. The next guy is in a similar boat. It's J.K. Dobbins. It's a little bit more interesting here because he did have an injury. Well, he was coming off of the ACL injury last year, and then he had a little cleanup procedure done during the season. There were clips of him running, and he just looked odd last year running. He was efficient, but the way that he ran, it was odd. There was a picture of his knee, and it looked all screwed up. So anyway, Dobbins isn't playing. It seems to be linked to some sort of quote unquote injury. He's on the pup list right now, but John Harbaugh won't give any straight answers about why he's not playing. So for the most part, I'm viewing this the same way, where I think he's sort of quietly holding out, trying to get an extension. And I think he'll be back by week 1. But the fact that this is sort of linked to some kind of injury that we don't know about is a little bit concerning to me. What do you think about Dobbins?
The Dobbins concern for me definitely is more predicated on his injury history rather than the contract negotiation. I don't think that while he did put together a few really nice games last year and some really efficient work while he was healthy, he didn't do enough really to warrant any kind of long-term deal. And I feel like he and his agent probably know that.
Mhm.
Similarly to the way that Cam Akers still has a lot left to prove. And I'm sorry to bring Cam Akers into literally every conversation I have, but both of those guys are from the same rookie class, and they both also are entering a contract year, but neither of them have done enough in their careers so far, in my opinion, to warrant the kind of extension that these other guys like Saquon and Jacobs are trying to get. So I think that
Mhm.
they will eventually come around to the fact that they do have to earn their keep a little bit. And while I'm sure Dobbins is trying to just lock up his future because of how beaten up he's been throughout his career, he's going to have to play to get that kind of money.
Yeah, I'm just waiting to hear about the Clyde Edwards-Helaire holdout, to be honest. When's he gonna hold out to get his bag?
You're not hearing anything about that from
He's
me,
clearly
man.
earned it. No, I agree with you. It's really the only thing is whether there's an injury. I don't tend to think there's an injury just because he did finish the year healthy. There's been no news at all about a specific injury or aggravation that he's had or any kind of surgery. So I think he's just silently kind of pouting about not getting an extension and that he'll be back. And like you said, he has literally no leverage. He doesn't even have like last year's stats as leverage. Like literally hasn't done anything. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I think he's good. I think he could have a good season. I've gone on record as being kind of high on him for this year relative to years past, but he definitely hasn't proven himself to be an elite player.
Of all the teams in the league, too, a team with Lamar Jackson at quarterback is probably the least likely team in the entire league to shell out on a running back because they have a built-in top 5 rushing attack playing quarterback, and they really
Yeah,
don't need to invest in talent at the running back position. They can just keep it a revolving door, and they're going to be fine.
absolutely. I mean, Dobbins was efficient last year, but I'm pretty sure Gus Edwards was like at 5 yards per carry or something like that too. So
Having
it's
that
definitely
extra
part of the
guy
scheme.
having that extra guy getting pulled out of the box by having the threat of a rushing quarterback on every single rushing play is just such an underrated aspect of that position. It's something that's going to make Jonathan Taylor really good this year, but it's something that could definitely weigh into the Colts' long-term plan at running back.
Yeah, well, that's a great segue because the next guy I wanted to talk about is Jonathan Taylor, who seemingly out of nowhere was just like, I don't want to play for the Colts anymore. Trade me. I wasn't expecting it. I've been drafting Jonathan Taylor in best ball. I've been, trading for him in Dynasty where I can. I've kind of thought he was a solid value in both formats. This is obviously a concern. Like, you don't really want your early round picks to be disgruntled with the teams that they're playing for. But again, he's entering a contract year. He hasn't gotten an extension yet. And unlike Dobbins, Akers, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he has proven some things throughout his career. He did have an RB1 overall finish a couple years back. He has been super efficient and handled a lot of work for the Colts. So I don't know. Again, this is a situation where I don't really think Taylor has any leverage because if he holds out, he's not going to accrue that season that he needs to hit free agency. Even if he does accrue a season, he can still be franchise tagged. I don't really see any way that this works out for Taylor short of getting traded. And if he gets traded, I mean, heck, his situation could get better. I'm not too worried about him if he gets traded. He's going to get a ton of work. Any team that trades for him obviously plans to utilize him, and he's one of the best running backs in the league.
I think that the sort of consensus that me and you are arriving to is that the discount here is actually pretty nice, and the situations in general probably won't get much worse if they get worse at all, and they definitely could get a lot better. I wouldn't mind seeing Jonathan Taylor on a lot of other teams in the league. I've heard that the Chiefs would be a contender for him. I don't know how much merit there is to that, but
Oh my
at the end
gosh.
of the day, like there's upside here and there's downside here, but there always is. For Taylor specifically, he is literally one of the best running backs in the NFL. So he's going to be good no matter where he is. And if you think he's not going to play, well, you're probably wrong about that. And he probably is going to play in this coming season. So there's no reason to be really that worried about investing in Jonathan Taylor. And I'm all for drafting him in the late second range where he's going.
Yeah, I'd say there's at least like I don't know, a 90% chance that he's playing for either the Colts or another team by
Yeah.
week one. So I'm buying a discount if there's a discount, especially in Dynasty, because in Dynasty, like, it's not even just about this year. Like, he has multiple years in front of him. He's still 24 years old. So if you're able to get him at a discount now, even if he does miss part of this season, you're probably still making out like a bandit in the long run because he is going to have multiple seasons. He does remind me of somebody like a Nick Chubb who could age really well as a rusher and give you very productive seasons out to age 27, 28, 29. So I would be putting out some feelers in Dynasty if you have other running backs in a similar tier, maybe a tier below, maybe like a Travis Etienne, Kenneth Walker, and you can even like a Barkley, something like that, add a little extra, get into Jonathan Taylor right now. That seems pretty appealing to me. In the meantime, I've been snapping him up on underdog in the third round sometimes, which is crazy. You can build some really wild looking teams when Jonathan Taylor drops to 31 overall. And it feels good. It definitely feels good. And if he plays in Indianapolis, I mean, Anthony Richardson is just going to open up running lanes for him like crazy. Like you said, not going to see a lot of passing work, but I think just sheer volume alone is going to make him kind of a Derrick Henry-esque type of play this year.
A Jonathan Taylor season in a contract year with Anthony Richardson at quarterback, also running the ball a ton because he's still a rookie, would be a sight to see. That would be like some scorched earth stuff from him. He would be
I think
going
we'll see it.
insane.
I think we'll
I
see it.
hope so. I really
Yeah.
do.
All right. Well, pivoting from some of these younger, talented running backs to some older and maybe not so talented running backs anymore, let's talk about Alvin Kamara because he
Respect
did get
Alvin
his
Kamara.
suspension. I don't respect Alvin Kamara's game much anymore, but I do respect him as a potentially well-priced option for dynasty contenders on a budget. He got a 3-game suspension. Ultimately, there was a lot of speculation about how long his suspension would be. Now we know he's going to miss 3 games, and then he'll be back with the Saints. Yeah, I mean, that seems like kind of the middle ground between what people were expecting, maybe between 0 and 6 games, and it ended up being 3. He's been pretty cheap all offseason in Dynasty. You could get him for a second round pick. You could get him for less than that sometimes. As far as I can tell, that looks like a sharp play. Whether or not he is quote unquote washed or whether he's as effective as years past, he's still going to be the guy in the passing game when he comes back. He's still going to get some work on the ground as well. So I don't know. He seems like a guy as soon as he comes back who's probably going to be a mid to high end RB2.
I fully agree. I've been scooping up a ton of Alvin Kamara in like the 10 to 13 range of startup drafts, which I think is pretty absurdly late for him to be going. He still finished as a top 20 running back last year, and his role should stay fairly similar. They added a
With
little bit.
Ezekiel Elliott. So
Sorry.
Ezekiel Elliott also finished as a top 20 running back last year.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a little different because he got cut and Kamara didn't get cut. And the Saints had all of the reasons to cut Kamara with that suspension and with the contract that Kamara has. But the fact
Yeah.
that he's still on the roster, it does say something. And I really didn't like the way they used him last year because they really didn't use him like the receiver that they should have been using him as. But I think that that's going to change in this coming season due to the way that they built the rest of the running back room.
Mhm.
Jamal Williams will probably take a lot of the early down work and unfortunately some of the red zone work. But if you've been an Alvin Kamara enjoyer for the past 6 seasons, you know that the red zone work is one of the most frustrating parts about watching a Saints game because he should have had 7 rushing touchdowns in that one game, and they gave it to Taysom Hill in the fourth
Oh man,
quarter.
that was that. I
We've
didn't even
been
have him, and I was tilted because I was like,
we've
dude,
been
just let him
watching
have.
this happen for so long. We've been
Yeah.
watching him get vultured at the goal line for years. It's not going to be any different with Jamal Williams, but he's still going to be an elite fantasy producer. Maybe not elite, but he'll still be in that RB2 range. I feel
Mhm.
almost certain about that.
Can you speak
And
to the receiving concerns a little bit? Because he was third in target share last year, 18.2%. So, what is it about his utilization last year that had you frustrated?
he got a lot more early down work, and he had a couple of games where it would be like 20 carries and 2 catches, which is just not
Mhm.
how we've seen Alvin Kamara be used. And
Right.
that's sort of just how his game has been aging, at least from what I've seen. I used to watch a good amount of Saints games because I was a really big Drew Brees fan, really big Michael Thomas fan, and a really huge Alvin Kamara fan. He was the first NFL jersey that I ever bought myself. Um, and it just looks different pretty much is how I feel about it. He looks more powerful, he looks bigger, and it looks like that's how they wanted to use him more last year. And I thought he did fine, but the
Mhm.
truth is he's not as efficient there as he is as a pass catcher. So I'm hoping that they revert back to the way that I'm used to seeing Alvin Kamara be employed, because watching him get 18 to 20 totes a game going downhill, getting beat up and getting hurt wasn't fun. So
Yeah, I mean, they should be using him more so, more so the way that the Niners want to use Christian McCaffrey, which is like give Elijah Mitchell all the carries that they can spare to him and let McCaffrey thrive in the passing game, manufacture touches for him, get him in space because like Kamara isn't a value adding rusher at this point in his career. Like it's very possible that Kendre Miller is a better rusher than him at this point in time, or comparable. And so if you want to think about like the comparative advantage of what you're getting, you're not really giving up anything to give carries away to other running backs in this room and saving Kamara for where he can add value, which is as a route runner and as a receiver. So that's probably what they should do. Whether they will do it or not remains to be seen. But Derek Carr is in town. He's not a mobile quarterback. He is most likely going to be looking to check it down to the running back that's on the field, and that'll probably be Kamara post week 3. So if you still have an opportunity to go ahead and buy in Dynasty, if you have a team where you could use an extra running back, I think he falls into the same kind of zone as Joe Mixon in terms of this is a guy who's probably a 1 year piece, or he's year to year at least. Maybe he's not retired next year, but this is a year to year asset where you should be buying with the assumption that he will just die on your roster. And if he gives you 15 points per game at the cost of like a late second round pick, you should be happy with that.
absolutely. And you mentioned Kendre Miller. I think that I've been pulling my punches a little bit too much on Kendre Miller because I've been high on him and not really made that very clear. I think he could be really, really good. And I think that he could be really good this year. I think that there's a world where him and Jamal Williams split up a lot of the early down work while Kamara takes a good amount of the receiving work. And I think that by the end of the season, Kendre Miller will pretty much cement himself as the guy in New Orleans. And heading into next year, I could see his value taking a pretty big leap from where it's at right now.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, as a third rounder, he's certainly not guaranteed anything in the future, but you have these two older running backs on the roster. We don't know how long they're going to be around. Jamal Williams is just a guy, really. He's just a really likable guy, but he's not a very talented guy. Um, Kendre is good. I mean, he had a good rushing profile, not much as a receiver, but if they release Kamara and Jamal Williams after the season, you could definitely see a nice little value gain for Kendra while he's the presumed starter in New Orleans, whether they do or they don't bring in competition eventually. There will be a sell window there for sure. I've been taking him late in best ball. I like the idea of him potentially maybe having some good games early in the season and then maybe building up his role later on to become that like 1-2 punch with Kamara, having some spike weeks later on. You're just buying the talent and assuming that the touches will come somehow because we don't know how injuries and stuff are going to play out.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel pretty much the exact same way on Kendra.
All right, we'll wrap it up with our last running back with a little bit of news. And the news is that there's no news on Dalvin Cook. He seems to just ping pong back and forth from the Dolphins to the Jets. I guess he just like flies to New York on Monday, flies back to Miami on Friday. Has he been linked to any other teams? Does anybody
Patriots, I
want his
think.
services? Right, the Patriots. That's right. So that's it. He's going to play in the AFC East. We just don't know where. Wait till he signs with his brother in Buffalo. Surprises everybody. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with Dalvin Cook. It doesn't seem like he's valued the way that he wants to be valued around the league, which just kind of speaks to the idea that he's not the guy that he has been. It might take an injury before he signs anywhere. Like if we see an injury in the preseason, maybe he'll just sort of swoop in and take that spot. The Colts don't seem to be interested in the midst of this Jonathan Taylor debacle. They did inquire about Kareem Hunt. Apparently, they're very interested in signing Kareem Hunt, which makes some sense, I guess, if he's like a guy they could use early in the season if Taylor's holding out and use as like a pass blocker, third down guy. Otherwise, that makes some sense. They're not really looking to bring in a quote unquote high profile player like Cook. I don't know of any other natural spots for him, to be honest. Or do you have a read on how this is going to play out, or are we just sort of waiting and seeing?
I wish I had a better insight, but my really only insight with Dalvin Cook is I just don't think he's very good anymore. And I think that he's in his head, obviously, has the confidence that he is still the top 5 kind of running back that he's been for the past few seasons, but he just wasn't that last year. And everyone else saw it. We all saw it, and all the NFL teams know it. And that's the reason why he's not getting the kind of money he thinks he deserves. There's just a fundamental miscommunication there. And I don't really see it being resolved very soon. Like you said, it's probably going to take an injury. Maybe a team gets desperate. I don't really know what's going to happen there. It's not a situation I really am trying to get too invested in. So I don't really have any Dalvin Cook shares if I'm being completely transparent. And I have no plans of adding them. It's just a very high risk asset with not a ton of ceiling just due to the lack of talent I think that is still left in that
Yeah.
that situation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have very little interest in Cook. Unlike the other guys we mentioned, there's not really any scenarios where I'm buying Cook because like think of it this way. Okay, he's not being signed, which means he's probably not very talented anymore. We already knew that. He's lost a step. Also, the only teams he's been linked to, we have the Patriots. Okay, they have Ramondre Stevenson. We have the Jets. They have Brees Hall. The Dolphins, fine. I'll give you that's kind of wide open. I mean, I like Devon Achane, but he's certainly not an entrenched guy. So the Dolphins are really the only spot of the ones that we're aware of where there's even any appeal to him as a fantasy asset. They seem to be the least in the mix at this point. Like they would have already signed him by now if there was any mutual interest in terms of the money because Cook clearly wanted to go there. They had talked about a trade earlier. Clearly, the money's not anywhere close. I don't think he's going to Miami. So wherever he's going to be a shell of himself, probably behind another starter, or maybe he falls into touches somewhere where somebody gets hurt. But again, I just don't think there's going to be sustained success there.
I just don't have the confidence that he's going to do anything with those touches.
Yeah, exactly.
I just don't see any upside here
I
really.
think this is just like a very fast flickering out because it's not even like he's a big pass catcher. Like Leonard Fournette was able to produce in fantasy well beyond his decline because he was just getting peppered with targets. Cook's never even been like a high volume pass catcher. So there's not
And
really
there
a
aren't
lot of
any
out
more
for him.
Tom Brady's who are throwing 20 passes a game to their running backs too.
No more Tom Brady's, unfortunately. So yeah, not buying Cook. Interested in buying Jacobs, Dobbins, Taylor, or Kamara if you can get yourself a discount. I think that those situations are all going to resolve themselves favorably. Moving on to some camp battles and beat reports. Let's talk about a few more running backs in Philadelphia. We have a very interesting battle between two, sort of three, maybe four, maybe five running backs. In Philadelphia, we have DeAndre
Respect Boston
Swift,
Scott. I like it.
respect Boston Scott. We even have some Trey Sermon sightings. So listen, it's deep in Philadelphia. Plus, Jalen Hurts is kind of like another running back. So they got running backs for days. Whether any of them are good remains to be seen. Rashad Penny is, well, I'm just going to try to run through some of the headlines and some of the things that we're hearing. But we have DeAndre Swift, Rashad Penny, Kenny Gainwell. Those are really your main three guys. Kenny Gainwell is being featured in the 2-minute drill, apparently, which is a role that he's occupied for the past 2 seasons since he joined the team. He's been adequate at that role, not like incredible, but certainly not a liability. I will not be surprised if he holds on to that role. Meanwhile, we have DeAndre Swift being used primarily in the passing game, trying to get him the ball in space. That makes sense to me. That's what he's good at. And then we have Rashad Penny seeing first team work in camp. So honestly, so far, this is kind of playing out how I expected. I think the most likely outcome here is a very muddled committee where one of these guys might have a good week, but you don't know which one it's going to be. And it's going to be a big headache to deal with and manage leagues. What are you seeing here, Ben? Do you see it similarly?
I like Rashad Penny a lot. I've picked him up in the late rounds in that same range that I mentioned about Kamara, 12 to 13 range. He's available super cheap. He's the most efficient running back in NFL history, and he's just fallen into a even better situation than he's ever been in with, like we said earlier, a rushing quarterback who pulls another defender out of the box. It's just lining up for him to average 9 yards per carry. It's going to be insane. I'm so here for it. With the Philly offense, it really seems to me like they took Miles Sanders and just like chopped him up into bits and like spread them out. And it's really cool. And I kind of mess with it. And I think that Rashad Penny has the best path to getting the most valuable touches that Miles Sanders got, which were the occasional goal line touches that he got when Hurts didn't take it in, which led to a good amount of touchdowns for Sanders this year. And then also the early down work where, again, Hurts isn't the one taking it. So I think that Penny is probably my favorite of these three as far as 2023 prospects go. I don't really get excited at the fact of Kenneth Gainwell and DeAndre Swift splitting receiving work from Hurts, who doesn't really use his running backs a ton in the receiving game.
Right.
But I could see Swift kind of being employed as like this slot hybrid. And we always tell ourselves that the receiving running backs are going to turn into slot receivers, and it never actually happens. But in this case, I could see them getting sort of creative with it and just using him as like a gadget guy. I don't think there's a ton of fantasy ceiling there, but it'll be fun to watch, and I'm here for it for sure.
Okay, so you've said a lot of things, and I agree with many of them. I will push back on 9 yards per carry. That's probably a bit of hyperbole, but I think you know that. I'm not sure what you mean by chopping Miles Sanders up into bits. What other bits does he have other than the efficient rushing? Because he is a terrible receiver.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I don't think overly highly of Swift as a prospect either, and I think that he struggles with vision a lot. So I don't really know if I believe in him as like an extremely good receiver either, I guess.
But I think he's a flawed player, but I think his target shares sort of speak for themselves in terms of his ability to earn targets in the passing game. He is very explosive. I think he has some things to like. I have definitely beaten up on him on this podcast, but he definitely has some things to his game that I like. It's just that they don't match up super well with the Philly offense. I think, yeah, Penny looks good. I think he should be the favorite to get that early down rushing work because he is the best rusher on the team. The problem with that is the upside. Like, there's not a ton of ceiling because he's not going to get any targets. He's probably going to get less targets than even Miles Sanders got last year. He has just been like an absolute zero in the passing game his whole career. He might have fewer than like 20 career targets. Don't quote me on that, but it's in that vicinity. So he's not going to catch passes. His absolute ceiling outcome of like, I don't know, if he has like 1,300 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns, like even that's not going to be like a league winner. Obviously, massive win if you get him cheap in Dynasty, if you get him in the 10th round of a redraft or best ball league, you can definitely take that to the bank. But I will say that I think Swift here does have the most contingent upside in the sense that he's probably going to get most of the rushing work if Penny were to get hurt.
Which is really close to being a guarantee.
Which is definitely, it's a coin flip at best, right?
Yeah.
He's probably going to get the bulk of that early down work. I think you'd see maybe him and Boston Scott kind of split that. But if he's able to pick up 50% of the rushing work on top of being the main pass catcher, maybe there's a little something there. Or if Kenneth Gainwell gets hurt and then Swift becomes that third down back, because he certainly would become the long down the distance 2 minute drill back. He might even take that job throughout the season if he does play well and he minimizes his mistakes. There's some outs for Swift to pay off and to have a little bit more upside, I think, than the other backs in this backfield, which explains why he's going several rounds ahead of Penny. I think that is justified, even if he's not necessarily a guy that I'm targeting.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, maybe I was being a little harsh on him. There's a reason he has like a seventh, eighth round ADP compared to Penny, who goes in the 12th, 13th, and Gainwell, who's even later than that. There's a reason that people are still willing to move 20-24 seconds for him, and you wouldn't be able to field that for Penny. There is definitely a lot of upside with Swift, and he was a really good prospect coming out. And there's reason to believe that player could still be somewhere deep down, and maybe we'll
Yeah.
see that come out.
Yeah, my general stance remains the same. I still think he's borderline overvalued in Dynasty, although his price is coming down. I do not mind him, though, in best ball. I don't mind him as a seasonal play, because there are ways that this can break right. And when you get to that point in the draft, eighth, ninth round, when you're looking at running backs, you are just looking for the guys where things can fall their way and they can have some upside, not necessarily guys that are locked into those types of roles. So he has the fantasy friendly skill set. Maybe the Eagles pass more to running backs, or maybe, I don't know, Dallas Goedert gets hurt and that leads to more short area targets for the running backs. Like, there's just a lot of ways that it can play out. We know it's a good offense. We know Swift can succeed if he's utilized correctly. And honestly, the offensive line and just like the run scheme in general in Philadelphia might mask a lot of his deficiencies
Yeah,
anyway.
that's true too. And I
So,
think that good coaches always have a way of bringing out the best in their players, and we can see that happen with Swift for sure. I think pretty highly of Sirianni, and I think that if the replacement at OC is even close to what Shane Steichen was able to do, we
yeah.
could definitely have something here.
And last point I'll say is, if someone in your league is willing to move Swift for a 24-second, I would certainly take that, even as like kind of a hater. I would definitely take him for that price. So yeah, maybe reach out. If Ben's in any of your leagues, he might make that deal with you.
Zero
Uh,
exposure to DeAndre Swift, unfortunately.
I just won him in a dynasty auction draft that I was doing, because I ended up towards the end of the draft, I had a bunch more money than everyone else, which was fun. And there were a lot of players that popped up that were sort of these like mid-tier assets, and I won a bunch of players for really cheap. So I ended up getting Swift for like $4 out of my $200 budget. And I was like, that's fine. I'm not like a huge Swift fan, but that seems like a good price. And
Yeah.
so I think I have 2 shares between that and one other league. And we'll just see what happens, because
Yeah,
nobody
my
wants to
fingers
trade
are
for him.
crossed, man. I would rather see him work out than not work out. Like, I don't want
Right.
to be right about his career flaming out. So
Yeah. Yeah. The 2020 class needs a little bit of a boost, to be honest with you, from what it was supposed to be.
they were
So
supposed to be amazing. They were supposed to they were supposed to change the game, and here we are begging for one of them to be relevant.
seriously, please, one of you play week one, please. All right. Honestly, Zach Moss might end up being the only starter
Oh
week
God, didn't he
one.
just get hurt?
He did break his arm. That's true. All right. Let's move on here to our next guys. Not a battle, but 2 rookie tight ends that have both been getting some hype. We love the rookie hype. Sam Laporta and Luke Musgrave are getting rave reviews from their teams, the Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers, respectively. From the beat reports themselves, we have Laporta being the tight end one, having a featured role, a red zone favorite. All of those buzzwords about tight ends, and then we also have Luke Musgrave getting tons of first team reps. Apparently, he doesn't leave the field. He has already dug a grave for Tucker Kraft just outside the facility, and he's going to bury him in it shortly. What do you think about these rookie tight ends? Did you like them before? Do you care about any of this camp hype?
I try not to let camp hype really affect my evaluations on players too much, but at the end of the day, I do kind of like to put at least a little bit of stock into it, because I know that coaches at least value what they see from their players in practice, and that it's going to have some effect on their usage to a degree. I liked Laporta a lot before all of the OTAs and training camp began, so it's cool to see him playing well, and the clips all look great, and he's looking like the player that I saw on film when I scouted him. So it's cool to see that, I guess, get confirmed. But like, I'm really not gonna take any victory laps until I see him do it in a game. As for Musgrave, I've heard that he's like the fastest player on the Packers offense or something like that. And I guess That's obviously not including Christian Watson, but people have been talking about his athleticism really standing out. And that's something that will pop in training camps. And that's something that is noticeable in practice because this is his first time playing against NFL competition. And if he still looks like that good of an athlete, there's probably something there. I think that the Packers taking 2 tight ends on day 3 of the NFL draft was the most Packers thing I've ever seen in my life. That is
Yep.
just like the same like quirky drafting that they've always done. So I tried not to make too much of them drafting both of them, and I was sort of trying not to change my view on either of them after they did that. And I'm still sort of going to hold that stance of like, it doesn't matter that they drafted another guy. They can both be who I thought they were. And I liked Musgrave, and I didn't really know who Tucker Kraft was. So I think
Right.
that Musgrave will be cool. I think that Laporta will be cool. I'm not expecting much from them as rookie tight ends, but they're nice investments to have, good guys to have on your taxi squad, and
Mhm.
nice options for the future. I definitely think Laporta could have a pretty solid year with the amount of target competition that they have in Detroit right now.
Yeah, I liked both guys. I was targeting them both in rookie drafts. I didn't get a lot of Musgrave. I just didn't end up having picks in that range, but I've been trying to get him in some spots. I actually made a trade in a DFF, one of our DFF leagues, to get him, where I dealt. What was the trade? It was basically Trey McBride for Luke Musgrave and some other. There was like some smaller pieces mixed in there, but I'm kind of cooling on Trey McBride and I'm rising on Luke Musgrave. And I like the fact that he is a rookie, kind of reset the clock there. I like that he, doesn't have a lot of competition there in Green Bay. I think he'll get a chance to play a lot as a rookie, but I don't expect either of these guys to be super productive. Like you said, we have to temper our expectations for rookie tight ends. The Kyle Pitts, Evan Ingram type seasons are incredibly rare. We don't really see rookie tight ends make meaningful contributions very often. I actually pulled a tweet here from my friend Dynasty Zoltan FF on Twitter, who recently posted, probably in response to these types of camp reports, by the way. He said since 2000, only 14 tight ends have recorded 500 receiving yards in their rookie season. So that is less than one per year. That's 0.65 tight ends per year hitting 500 receiving yards, rookie tight ends. So, to expect 2, 3 of these guys to hit that mark as rookies is really betting against the norm. And I don't think it's going to happen. I think that they could get a lot of snaps and run routes, but at the end of the day, they are going to block some. It can be hard for them to adjust to the NFL game. We typically see tight ends ramp up slowly. If I had to bet on any tight end in this class to hit 500 yards, it would probably be Dalton Kincaid, since he plays with one of the best quarterbacks in the league on also a relatively open depth chart. But I wouldn't be surprised if none of them do it.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right there. I think that while this was labeled as a very good tight end class and one of the better ones that we've seen in a long time, the odds that you're betting against there are pretty insurmountable. So expecting really, like you said, more than 2 to hit over 500 yards would be a pretty big stretch.
Yeah, but these guys are good bets to accrue value if they are getting on the field, if they have any kind of spike weeks. Like Chigakonkwo, if you look at his season stat line, I mean, it was nothing. Like I don't think he did have 500 yards, but he was very efficient. He had some splash games towards the end of the season, and that's really all it takes to just jump up to tight end 15 in Dynasty, tight end
Yeah.
14. These guys are already kind of in that realm, but they could jump even higher with that draft pedigree that they already have, the expectations that are on them. And year 2 might be the time to really that you'll really want them. So might be
Yeah.
a good idea to get them now.
We were in dire need of an injection of youth and depth at the tight end position in Dynasty. It's been super dry for a really long time, and there's been not much. It's been super top heavy. So there's nothing wrong with adding a
Absolutely.
few mid tight ends, as far as I'm concerned.
Hopefully, the 2023 tight end class doesn't become the 2020 running back class,
Fingers are
where we're looking
crossed.
back for 3 years from now and they're all
Holding out.
holding out. They've all had season-ending injuries, and hopefully that's not what we're looking at. But yeah, I like these guys. Moving on to the next guy here, Javonte Williams. Talk a little Javonte Williams, where I could take just the tiniest little L on Javonte Williams. He hasn't played yet, obviously, but he is recovering more quickly than I expected, just based on the severity of his injury. He has gotten glowing reviews. He did not go on the pup. And now Sean Payton's saying he's going to play in the preseason. And I certainly wouldn't have bet on that. So maybe Javonte Williams is secretly Wolverine or some other regenerative superhero.
Maybe he's secretly Cam Akers.
Maybe he's secretly Cam Akers. Well, hopefully not, because then he would come back and suck for the whole year. Sorry, I shouldn't
No,
attack
no,
your
that's
son like
actually
that,
a great segue into what I was going to say about Javonte, which is it's great that he's coming back this fast.
right.
Please temper your expectations for him because there's no way he's going to return to form that fast. He might be out there
Yeah,
playing, he might be fully healthy, but he's not going to be back to his peak shape, peak athleticism that we saw him at last time we saw him playing. He was really good. He was getting a lot of catches. He might not have been as efficient on the ground as we wanted him to be, but he was pretty much the player that we thought he was. And we just can't expect that from him with this quick of a turnaround. I also think that he's not going to be getting the volume that we
mhm,
want. I think that it's going to be a good, healthy dose of Samaje Perine over there. Um, but I do think that Javante should probably be valued closer to the top 12 than he currently is. He's sort of sitting in that 14 to 18 range. And I think that that's
yeah,
just a little bit low based on the ceiling that we all saw for Javante when he got drafted. He was my RB1 in that class as a rookie. And he was top 5 in my dynasty rankings at one point at his position. And I think that I may have overcorrected a little bit. I did tweet out like a year ago, um, why is Brees Hall's ACL injury so much less bad than Javonte Williams' ACL injury? Because Brees hurt his knee and didn't budge from the RB1 spot in Dynasty, and Javonte hurt his knee and fell like 20 spots. So I've
yeah.
never I've never understood why we faded him so hard, if I'm being
I
perfectly
think.
honest.
Well, I think one was that all the reports were that Brees's was like more of a clean injury, and that Javante's was like extra stuff. And then maybe the other thing is just Brees had like a 7 week stretch of being incredible, and that was the only stretch that we had from him. Whereas Javante had like a year of being in a committee, and then a couple games of being in a committee, and then like 1 or 2 games of like really being the guy. But it wasn't quite enough to like make us sure that he was the guy. So maybe it just felt a little bit riskier with him. I'm not sure, but I've had him too low because I was more or less expecting him to be a zero for this year, and that's seeming less and less likely if he's not full go by week 1. Barring any setbacks, he's probably going to be old Javante by week 5, week 6 at the latest, I would guess. We have seen like last year, Chris Godwin and J.K. Dobbins coming back from their injuries. They had some re-aggravations during the season. They had a little bit of, some bumps and bruises along the way. Michael Gallup was nothing basically coming back from his ACL, even though he played all year. So we don't know for sure what he's going to look like. And that's a good point, but he's also not that cost prohibitive. Like in Dynasty, if you get half a season of meh or nothing, and then he's back, you can definitely stomach that. And in best ball and seasonal leagues, like he is still going kind of late. His ADP is rising, but last I checked, he was still in the 90s on underdog, and I'm definitely comfortable picking him there.
Yeah, that's a price that I'd be fine with as well. I'm not someone who plays any best ball or plays much seasonal, but I do think that at that kind of discounted price, there's upside here to be had. And I think that by the end of the year, we could see Javante coming back to some level of the player that he was before.
I'm gonna get you in the best ball streets at some point. I'm gonna
I am
initiate
game.
you.
I'm not. I'm
Underdog
not. I'm
is
not opposed to it.
addicting. I'm in like 23 slow drafts right now.
Whoa.
Yeah, my life is just decision fatigue at all times. It's like I wake up in the morning and I have to choose between Tyler Algier and Kendre Miller, and
Oh
it's
my
just like
god.
on repeat all day, every day. But I just love it. It helps to have some good rankings to fall back on to break some ties. And if you are a degenerate underdog drafter like me and you're in too many drafts, set your queue before you leave the draft. Like so that when you come back, all the guys that you're thinking about are already like starred, and you don't have to like look through the whole list of players and think about what you want to do. It helps you out a lot.
Wise words of
I mean,
advice there on how
yeah.
to manage your 23 best ball drafts that are happening simultaneously. Good luck, guys.
Exactly. Not just a dynasty podcast, is it? We also have best ball tips for how to bankrupt yourself on underdog fantasy. All right. Next, we're going to talk about a Chiefs wide receiver. I teased it earlier. There have been some reports, some people saying that Sky Moore projects as the Chiefs' top slot receiver. We have Andy Reid saying that Sky Moore is making a good jump. We have Sky Moore running with the first team at OTAs. That's a lot of Sky Moore propaganda, and I, for one, am here for it.
I'll let you take the lead on Sky Moore here because I didn't scout him much when he was coming out. That was sort of a down year for me as far as my process went. I was still pretty new to this. Most of my knowledge of Sky Moore sort of is limited to what I've heard from him from you guys and what I've heard from him in the broad Twitterverse, and it just doesn't seem like something that I would invest very much in. The amount of faceplant wide receivers who don't do anything in their rookie year and then come back and do something at any point is pretty low, and that's just kind of a bet that I usually try not to make. And I haven't really seen anything from Sky Moore that gets me overly excited. So I'll let you hype me up about him, and I'll go buy him after we
Mhm.
get off the show.
Well, first of all, I will say right off the top, I would not be trading anything substantial for him in Dynasty, but I am a little bit excited. I'll go ahead and throw some of his rookie or his prospect profile numbers at you just to get an idea of what you're dealing with here. He played at a small school, so we take it all with a little bit of a grain of salt. He did have a perfect score along with Drake London and Chris's analytical model from last year. He didn't rank him that way because there are, contextual factors of playing at Western Michigan and all that, but he had a 44.6% dominator, second best in the class. He had a 35.5% best season target share, very strong. 46% best season touchdown share, very strong. 3.8 best season yards per team pass attempt, also one of the best in the class, might have been tied for best in the class. So this was a dominant college athlete with second round draft capital to the Chiefs. It seemed like all systems go. I was in on him as a late first round pick last year, but it did not work out. Obviously, he didn't play a whole lot as a rookie. When he did play, he was fine. He was not a liability on the field on a per route basis. You look at, like, I don't know, David Bell, he ran some routes and he sucked on those routes. Sky Moore ran routes and he played admirably on those routes, at least as well as an average rookie. It's just that he couldn't get on the field, which is concerning when the other wide receivers on the team are so mediocre. But that being said, he's still there. He's getting hype. The wide receivers are still mediocre. And now he's supposed to be the best of those mediocre wide receivers, it seems. So there's a little bit of hope there. If you're going to run every route with Patrick Mahomes, or most of the routes with Patrick Mahomes, you can definitely fall into some fantasy points. Like I said, when he was on the field, he scored some fantasy points. He just wasn't on the field. So if he's going to play, it looks like he's going to play. I don't know. I'm interested in that because MVS is going to play out wide, and he's probably going to be like their every down guy who just is an NPC, and he runs down the field and he draws defenders and he doesn't get targets. And then you're going to have presumably Kadarius Toney when he's healthy, or if he's healthy. And if not Kadarius Toney, maybe Rashee Rice or something like that. And then you're going to have probably Sky Moore playing in the slot. The only other player that would really project for that role is Richie James. And I mean, if you can't beat out Richie James, then I mean, then it's definitely over, and you can just drop him to waivers. But he's probably going to play a lot, and that just makes me very interested.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a fine flyer to take at the end of drafts in the range that he's available. And like you said, don't move anything overly substantial to get him because really your odds aren't amazing. But like you said, there's upside to be had of anyone who has a chance to be playing that much with the best player in football has a good chance
Mhm.
to provide some value as an asset. So
Yeah, for some context, he was going from May through July. He was going as the wide receiver 56 on average, right next to Hendon Hooker and Brandon Cooks, in the same round as Chase Brown, Darnell Mooney, Jacoby Myers. That's a price I would definitely have been comfortable paying. I don't know if he's gone up. Let's just check real quick the last month of ADP. Maybe he's crept up. If he's still in that range, I would be buying him pretty aggressively, if I'm being honest. ADP over the last month. Okay, see, now he's up to wide receiver 51, but he's almost a round and a half higher. Now he's next to Roshan Johnson and Jimmy Garoppolo. He's ahead of Marvin Mims. He's ahead of Luke Musgrave. It's a little bit more cost prohibitive. He's ahead of your boy Rashad Penny. So not as exciting to buy him,
hmm.
but certainly not. If you buy him in that range and he flames out, it's not like it's the end of the world.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, if you want to have a little fun in your life, go bet on another Chiefs wide receiver.
I talk all the time about how much I love to swing for upside, and there's upside there. There's nothing wrong with that, with taking him over most of the guys that we just mentioned. It's him over a guy like Marvin Mims or Rashawn Johnson is probably not a bet that I'd make, but I'm not going to argue with anyone who would do that.
Well, then go trade for some Sky Moore, you fraud.
Maybe I will.
Okay, good. I hope you do. Uh, I,
Keep
I
you
would I
posted.
would trade Roshan Johnson for him. Currently backing up Travis Homer in Chicago as the
Is he
third down
really?
back. Well, they dropped an unofficial depth chart.
Yeah,
There's some
apparently
intro I
Bijan
probably
Robinson
made.
is the third string guy in Atlanta too. So
Oh my gosh, did that happen on the
yeah,
depth
they
chart?
put him behind Cordero and Algier
Yeah,
today.
if there's any evidence that you don't need to pay
Isn't that
attention to those,
hilarious?
then you don't.
That's
Because
so
on
funny.
the Bears, it's Khalil Herbert, Deontay Foreman, Treston Ebner, Travis
Wow.
Homer, Rashawn Johnson. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think they just list it in order of veteran experience. Like I think they just put the
Yeah.
veterans
Yeah.
first, and then they put the rookies at the back, and that's just how it works. I'm not really sure
Jalen
what
Naylor
purpose
is
they
above
serve.
Jordan Addison. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
So,
Jordan Addison. Well, that's the next guy we're going to talk about because I'm very in on Jordan Addison, and he is apparently when he is not driving 140 miles per hour in his Lamborghini to
he's
save
saving his dog,
his
man.
fictional dog.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
gosh.
he is apparently turning heads at Vikings camp, and he is learning the playbook well, and he is really set up to smash this year. I don't know. What do you think of Jordan Addison? I know you like to watch the film. So what did you see from him on film just a little bit? And then what are you expecting from him in the near term?
He's super shifty and he's a really, really crafty and really explosive and sharp route runner to the point where I think that he is almost like the perfect training camp player where you're going to get a bunch of videos of him absolutely toasting DBs because in a one-on-one situation, he's one of those guys who is borderline unguardable. I think that he fits really well into that mold of I see the Devonte Smith comparisons, but I sort of likened him more to like if Stephon Diggs was really, really skinny, I think that he would
Mhm.
play a lot like Jordan Addison. I think that Addison, while obviously he's going to struggle in a lot of contested catch and traffic situations, I think that his ability to get open is going to prevent him from being in a lot of those spots. And I think that he's just going to be one of those guys like Devonte Smith was last year, where you're just like, wow, he's open again. Wow, he's open again. Wow, look at
Yeah,
him.
playing
He's wide open.
alongside or across from Justin Jefferson is
It's
probably going to help with
awesome.
that a
It's
little
the
bit too.
perfect situation for him. And that's why we were all freaking out when he got drafted to the Vikings. We were like, here it is. He's got it. He's going to be in a one-on-one every time. And literally the best thing that we wanted for him was I don't want him to be a deep threat. I don't want him to be attacking zone. I want him to be one-on-one with one other corner across from him. And I want him to just cook that guy. And that's exactly what I
Mhm.
think he'll do. So I'm
Yeah.
really excited about Addison. I think that all of the hype that we're seeing is pretty warranted. And I think that the general consensus over at DFF2 is that he's probably gonna smash, and we have him. I think a lot of us have him as a potential rookie wide receiver one. So
Yeah, I'm very high on him. I'll make a little bit more detailed case for him in a second here. I just am curious because the discussion did come up in the Discord earlier. Are you team Quentin Johnston in Dynasty or team Jordan Addison?
I have them ranked literally back to back, and I think that I could wake up tomorrow and probably flip my stance on
But
it.
which one of them is ahead, Ben?
Today, right now, it's Jordan Addison. Um, I think it's a bit of a safer bet, which is why I think I could flip, is because I think that Johnson has a higher ceiling. And I'm not like breaking any crazy hot take here,
Mhm.
telling you that Quentin Johnson has a higher ceiling and Jordan Addison has a higher
Did
floor.
you know that he plays with Justin Herbert?
You must be joking. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Did you know that he plays with Justin Jefferson? Anyways,
Yeah.
the point being, they both have a lot of similar projections, and they have fairly similar situations. But I think that the ceiling outcome for Quentin Johnston is he becomes wide receiver one, and the ceiling outcome for Jordan Addison is he becomes wide receiver two for way longer than Quentin Johnston becomes wide receiver one. So I'm
Right.
totally fine, especially in a deeper league, taking the safe bet with Jordan Addison. I think that there's a very low chance that he doesn't end up being good. Whereas with Johnston, I think that there is still a little bit of risk that he might not be the guy that we want him to be, that he could just be another Mike Williams.
Yeah. So I see it similarly. I have Addison ahead. And the reason for that is I was more sold on Addison as a prospect, first of all. He just has a cleaner profile, in my opinion. And like you said, more likely to be a good player or less likely to not be a good player, however you want to say that. And that matters to me with rookies. Like, yes, theoretically, the upside for Quentin Johnston is higher in the sense that he could find himself next year as the wide receiver one in a Justin Herbert offense. And that is very appealing. But by the same token, like Jordan Addison has a lot of upside in terms of market value if he smashes this season and everybody's like, wow, this guy's really good. And then you can literally just go trade him for a player that you know is good, or you can keep him, I guess, if you want. But like Devonta Smith is a third round startup pick. He plays with AJ Brown. Everybody knows that. And AJ Brown's young. He's not going anywhere. He's not as good as Justin Jefferson, but he dominates almost as many targets. Um, and Devonta Smith plays in an offense that's going to throw like 100 fewer passes per game per season than the Vikings offense, and nobody cares. Like it's like this guy can ball. We're going to take him at 310 ahead of Stephon Diggs. Like
Yeah.
that's the upside case for Addison. I think that's plenty of upside because you could literally just, if you don't even want that profile of player, fine, you can go trade him for Drake London. You could go trade him for Kyle Pitts. Like
Yeah.
you don't need the upside to be within the player themselves. You are allowed to trade the players. And I just see it playing out for Addison where he gains a lot of value throughout this year. And Johnston might too. I just am less sure of that because he's not going to get as much playing time unless there's an injury. And I'm not as sure that when he gets playing time, he's going to produce. Whereas with Addison, he's going to be an every down player from week one. Don't listen to the KJ Osborne hype. He's a blocker. Addison's going to be like an every route guy from week one. Adam Thielen was like top 3, I think, in routes in the NFL last year. Like he's going to run tons of routes. He is a good route runner. Like you said, he's set up for success across from Justin Jefferson. And this team's going to throw the ball a ton. They're probably going to be top 5 in pass attempts again this season, like they were last year. If Addison has like a mid to high end wide receiver 2 season as a rookie, I mean, he's going to be a rocket ship. Like nobody's going to care that he plays with Justin Jefferson. We've seen 2 wide receivers succeed. We've seen, I mean, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are both top 3 round picks. AJ Brown and Devonta Smith are top 3 round picks. We saw Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen in the same jerseys both be top 4, 3 round startup picks at times. So I don't think there's anything standing in his way. And I am really targeting him in Dynasty right now. I'm targeting him in best ball. I think it's all systems go.
I have a good amount of Jordan Addison as well. And I agree with you on a lot of what you said in that he doesn't have to be his team's wide receiver 1 to still give us a fantasy wide receiver 1 season. We've seen Tyler Lockett do that a bunch of years without being his team's primary receiver. We've seen Devonta Smith do it last year, and there's no reason why I think Jordan Addison within the next 3 seasons couldn't give us a top 12 finish. And like you said, vault himself up into that top 3 startup round pick. And then you can flip him for someone who is their team's wide receiver 1 if that's your thing.
Yep, exactly. So I'm into him. I haven't gotten as many shares as I want because I ended up with a bunch of 106s and 109s in rookie drafts and not a lot of 7s and 8s. So I only have like a couple of Addisons and Johnstons, but I've been putting out the feelers. I've been trying to pick up some because I do really feel like his value is going to be on the rise.
It's in a nice spot right now too. It's really not that like unpalatable, if I'm being completely honest. I feel pretty comfortable buying Addison with where people are out on him.
Definitely. His value has not jumped the shark yet. We're going to close out the show today with just a little bit of preseason talk. Unfortunately, in recent years, well, fortunately for the health of the players, but unfortunately for us as viewers, a lot of players just don't play in the preseason or they don't play very much. We don't get to see, first team offenses all together very often. But there are still some things going on in the preseason that we might want to keep our eyes on. And so I'm going to just turn it over to you real quick, Ben. Is there anything that you think everybody should be paying attention to this NFL preseason?
There are a couple points that I kind of wanted to touch on really quickly, just about like what we're looking out for in the preseason. The first is obviously rookies, and this mostly applies to later round rookies who are actually getting their real shot to sometimes making the roster. That's obviously going to be fun to watch because a lot of these guys do have their careers literally on the line, and it can make for some pretty entertaining football. As for your earlier guys, Jordan Addison is supposed to play in the preseason. CJ Stroud is supposed to play in the preseason. We have a lot of probably all 4 of those rookie quarterbacks who we were looking at as potential week 1 starters look like they're going to be playing in the preseason. And that's just kind of fun to watch. But at the end of the day, you really should take everything you see in the preseason with a grain of salt and try not to overthink it, because that's really the trap that we get in the preseason as dynasty players, is overthinking what we see, and it is going to backfire. We saw that happen with Jamar Chase and the supposed drop concerns that we saw flare up in the preseason, and then he
Yeah.
absolutely lit the world on fire. You don't want to be the guy who faded Jamar Chase because he was dropping passes in the preseason. At the
Yeah.
end of the day,
Generally.
these are preseason games. They're going to play the first
Mhm.
quarter. They're not going to play anything else. So
Generally, if you're usually you want to be the person who is fading the preseason news and buying all the players with the bad narratives and such, because
zig
there's
when
just
they zag is what I like to
yeah,
call it.
exactly. These offenses are playing like very vanilla. They're not doing anything crazy. Same goes for the defenses, and so it can lead to some like really weird lopsided situations, or maybe you have a team where most of the first team offense is playing and the other team has like no defensive starters in, and there's just like way too many factors to factor in to decide whether what you're looking at is real or not, where you just shouldn't buy into it too much. But it will definitely be fun to watch the rookie quarterbacks play, players like Addison. And like you said, those late round rookies, somebody like Sean Tucker. I'm not sure if he's playing in the preseason or not. I would assume because he was recently cleared.
Yeah.
Uh, that would be interesting for me as somebody that I like. Zach Evans. So all the late round running backs that I loaded up on that I've piled onto my dynasty benches, I definitely want to see if they have any juice, if they have any potential to latch on. And then maybe some of these undecided backup running back situations elsewhere, like in Dallas, we have the Rico Dowdle trying to come in here and ruin my like 20% Malik Davis exposure. We have the Chargers. We're still not sure who out of Isaiah Spiller and Joshua Kelly sucks less.
Oh,
So
God.
we got to figure out some of these backfields, and that's probably one thing I'll be looking for.
That was a ruthless stray you just dropped there. I've been keeping track of the factory tour stray of the week, and that was it right there.
That's a
Josh
two for
Kelly
one
just
for
cut.
you.
Yeah, no, really. Yeah, like you said, the rookie running backs are. It's been something that we've been sort of pounding the drum on all offseason, is that you should be finishing off most of your rookie drafts and most of your startup drafts by hammering running backs and tight ends, because that's where the volatility is and that's where the variance is going to either help you or not help you. But it's better to have a chance than just drafting a bunch of wide receivers whose ceilings are like 3 catches a game. So
Mhm.
I'm with you there on the running backs. The other things that I'm looking at are the little quarterback battles that we might have left. Specifically, I'm talking about Malik Willis and Will Levis, Kyle Trask and Baker Mayfield, and the 49ers quarterbacks. There are a lot of really, really gross names in there that I just threw out. And a lot of that is not going to be overly fantasy relevant, but it is good
Yeah.
football to watch. And it's going to be, or not always good football, I guess I should say, but it's going to be intriguing to see how that all plays out. And it's definitely something I think is worth keeping an eye on, especially the way the Niners end up managing Purdy and Lance. I think is going to be really fascinating this preseason, because it looks like they are going to play at least a little bit. And all of the signs we've been seeing are
Mhm.
pointing towards Purdy being the week 1 starter. But it'll be interesting to see how Lance does in the preseason, getting some NFL action, because that is really our big drawback on him, is how's he going to look. Maybe he's going to put on and get traded week 1, and we'll see him in a nice purple and gold uniform throwing darts to Justin
We definitely
Jefferson
won't
and
be
Jordan
seeing
Addison.
him. We definitely won't be seeing him in the year 2023 in a purple and gold uniform, unless Kirk Cousins has been abducted by aliens or something like that. Um,
It wouldn't surprise me with Kirk. That guy's
for
crazy, man.
for what it's worth, Purdy is not supposed to play in the 49ers'
Oh,
first
okay.
preseason game. Lance and Darnold are listed both as the second string quarterback. So we'll see which one of them plays first and whether that matters. We'll see how they both operate the offense, and then we have Brandon Allen as their fourth quarterback. Um, I
Must
assume
see TV.
I assume by the end of the preseason, Brandon Allen will also be ranked ahead of Trey Lance, both on the 49ers depth chart and in dynasty leagues. But we'll see. I think
Ah,
that I
what
think
a
that there's
disaster this offseason has been for Trey Lance, man.
yeah,
God.
what a disaster of a career so far for Trey Lance. I would assume that the dip will continue, and maybe once his startup ADP gets into the double digit rounds, we can think about buying. But for now,
I was gonna ask, are you buying him yet?
I
And
am
like
not
his
buying.
ninth
He's
round? Okay.
radioactive. He
Yeah,
is
pretty
he is
much.
toxic
Chernobyl.
waste. I have no interest. I mean, maybe he's the kind of radioactive where you like get superpowers afterwards, but it remains to be seen. I have a couple shares that I was not quick enough in trading that I'm just stuck with at this point. But yeah, I don't hate myself enough to pick up any more at the moment. I'm not drafting him in best ball or anything like that. Don't try to get cute. He's probably not going to play this year. So yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a sad this is, if you want any action on Trey Lance, you're going to have to become a preseason fantasy football player, because this is really going to be your chance
Preseason fantasy
to
football.
yeah, like if you want to put him in your preseason DFS lineups, be
The
my
elite
guest.
rushing upside is about to present itself, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
It's
really,
here.
if you have some Lance bags and you like really need to cope bad, like put him in your DFS line as the captain for your showdown or whatever, and just see what happens.
I'm
But
smashing straight overs on all of Trey Lance's prop bets this
now,
week.
you mentioned a battle between Malik Willis and Will Levis. Is this a thing? I have not heard of
I've
this. I thought
I
Malik Willis
saw
was done, like banished to the
no.
shadow realm.
I saw today that Willis is actually second on the depth chart, and I guess, like we just said, it's probably just because he's been there longer. But apparently, he has improved a ton and has the playbook down more. He looks sharper. I don't really think there's anything there, but he's one of those guys who I've been like taking in the 28th round because like the
Right.
ceiling outcome for him is like,
Mhm.
okay, maybe he actually gets a starting job at one point, and maybe it's like a 1 in 20 shot, but that's fine. I'll take that. Like at
I
that
mean,
point in the draft,
he's basically Trey Lance at this point, right? I
he's
mean, what's the
basically Trey
difference?
Lance at this point, except
Yeah.
he's a year younger, and that's cool.
To be fair with Malik Willis, he could improve a ton and still be the worst quarterback in the NFL. Um, but Will Levis
There's room to
probably
grow.
probably right there with him. So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, the fact that Will Levis is even in a competition with Malik Willis is really
does
just
not
giving
bode
me more
well.
confidence in all of my round 18 Ryan Tannehill shares that I have in best ball.
He's a good bet right now,
And in
though.
Dynasty, he's one of my most owned Dynasty
Yeah,
quarterbacks. I think he's a great QB3. Like, I think he's the perfect QB3 in the sense that he's valued as like the last valued starting quarterback. We know that when he starts, he's better than the QB 32 in fantasy. Like, he's probably like QB 20 ish range as a starter. And by the end of the year, if he's your QB3, you aren't really banking on him to play anyway. So, like, if you have, I don't know, Deshaun Watson and Dak Prescott as your starters, Tannehill's like the perfect QB3, because by the time you get to the fantasy playoffs, you're playing those other two guys no matter what. Like, if they're not healthy, your odds of winning have already kind of taken a hit anyway. But Tannehill's probably starting for you as a good QB2 streamer type up through like week 15, 16 before they're eliminated from the playoffs.
yeah, and if they were to get hurt, he could provide you, like you said, with some QB2 replacement level value. And while there might not be a lot of long-term upside with him there, you can still get a game or two out of Ryan Tannehill this year. Absolutely.
Yeah, and he's just really cheap right now. Like
Yeah.
he
Dirt
he is
cheap.
so discounted because I guess because of the Will Levis pick, but
And
he's
they're
like
still gonna try this year too. Like the Titans are not rebuilding. They have not given up on their on this core. Like they're still
is
invested in it for
yeah, I
sure.
mean they just signed DeAndre Hopkins. Like they
Yeah.
are trying to win, Mike Vrabel, all he wants to do is win games.
Yeah.
Like
And
that's all
he's
he
good
cares
at it
about.
too. So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Ryan Tannehill right now is valued after Jalen Hyatt and one spot ahead of Tajay Spears. So that seems like the kind of trade that I would definitely make if
I would
you
smash a mid third for Ryan Tannehill right now.
yeah,
Oh yeah,
exactly.
dude. My
If you're in
gosh.
need of a quarterback three. Now, in an established league, it's not going to work exactly the same way because the odds that Tannehill is on a team that also requires his services this year is pretty high. But if you can trade Malik Willis and Tajay Spears and maybe convince them that way, or you can trade,
You
I don't
send them a
know,
screenshot of the
just
Malik Willis like training camp buzz, and then
just
you send
trade
the trade
Trey
offer right
Lance.
after.
Just trade Trey Lance for him or something.
Yeah, they're the
No,
same player.
I
So
probably wouldn't trade Trey Lance for Ryan Tannehill, even though it's probably the right move because Ryan Tannehill will probably score more career fantasy points between now and the end of their careers than Trey Lance. But
man, you are really out. Wow.
it's just I don't know. Maybe I'm just mad. Maybe I'm just bitter. That's probably not true, but it could be true. It could be
Yeah,
true. And it's crazy how far we've come. All right, Ben, anything else that we should be looking out for?
that's about it. Remember what I said about taking it with a grain of salt. Please do not put don't put much stock in preseason games. It's just kind of for stuff and giggles, I will say.
Yeah, I think that's a good rule of thumb and a good way to close out the show. Same goes for the camp reports, the beat reports, the all that stuff. Like once week one hits, 90% of this stuff is going to fly out the window. And like a lot of what we thought was true or what we expected to be trending a certain way is going to be completely different than we expected. So we can't be too entrenched in our priors. We can't be we have to stay liquid. We have to be able to adapt. And what we see in week 1 is going to matter a lot more than any of this stuff, to be honest with you. So things are going to get shaken up very
Just
I
keep a
mean,
cool head, and
mhm.
don't make any brash decisions in the next 3 weeks. We're almost there. It's
Yep.
coming. We did it. We made it through another off season. Let's get ready for another great year of football.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, this has been a pleasure. Always enjoy having you on the show. It certainly won't be the last time. And I'm glad we were able to do this despite the technical difficulties. Like I said earlier at the top of the show, I will be back next week talking with Matt Ward, Psych Ward FF on Twitter, if you happen to follow him. I'm looking forward to that show. In the meantime, I believe it is Ben's birthday tomorrow.
It is.
Is he is
Yeah.
turning 12, 20, 20
20,
years old.
12.
I'm just kidding. Ben is turning 20 tomorrow. So if
Yes.
you are watching this on YouTube and you could maybe wish him a happy birthday in the comments, it would mean a lot to me. Mean a
Oh,
lot to Ben. I think
thanks,
that
guys.
would be a nice thing to do. Hope you have a great day tomorrow, my friend.
You too,
And I
man.
hope the rest of you have a great week. I will see you then.